Hello and welcome everybody to According to Andrew number 82, Nationalism and Associated Questions with Nationalism. Um, so this is a topic that I have found interesting for a while. Mainly, I started thinking about it when Vox started talking about what is nationalism and all these other aspects, and just because you live in America and people in your past moved to America, you're not necessarily American because the Americans are the ones who are descended from the original British colonists that fought in the Revolutionary War to separate and create a new political entity from their British brethren over in uh, the the United Kingdom. So that's kind of the history of it. Vox defines nation, and I believe he's correct in this, by blood, language, religion, culture, and tradition. And this is where things get kind of muddied because, so for instance, in my case, my family moved over here in like 1820 from Ireland, and so I'm like probably like 7 or 8 generations or something like that. But like I'm still technically Irish, but am I really Irish? Like it's kind of this weird in between. And so I had a lot of questions on um, what nationalism is, what it is, and so I kind of dived, and it's a muddy topic. Like you're never really going to get clear-cut answers to some of this stuff. There's a lot of questions in there about this or that other thing, and the reason for that is yes, some of it is kind of muddy. Like right now, I'm technically an Americanized Irishman, right? Uh, Bloodline wise, I go back to Ireland. Language wise, I speak English, which technically the original language of Ireland is Gaelic. So like uh, basically all Irishmen that don't speak Gaelic have kind of lost an aspect of their national identity because of that. Um, Culturally, I'm American. Traditions wise, I guess I'm American. We don't have that many unique traditions in my family uh, that you can draw specifically being as American traditions. Anyway, uh, and then religion, I'm Catholic, which is not the nominal American culture is the WASP culture, right? The white Anglo-Saxon Protestant. Um, Catholic is not obviously a Protestant denomination. So that's kind of where I stand. I'm in this like weird in between middle ground, and I don't know if if I went back to Ireland, I would reculture it really easily, or maybe at least my kids would. If I went over there, got married to some Irish lady, and we integrated and everything worked out fine. But uh, maybe not. My family's been over here for 200ish years, and it took 400 years for the Americans to basically branch off and form their own nation. Maybe I'm kind of halfway on the way to being my own national thing. Not personally, but uh, you know, those people that have been separated from their homeland for that long, um, that don't really know which side of the aisle they identify with, are kind of in this weird middle ground, and they don't know really where they stand. So some stuff that I wrote on this a while back, uh, that is a way that it kind of all balances out. Um, is This makes things confusing. So Vox Day defines a nation as a group of people who are connected by blood, language, religion, culture, and tradition. This makes it confusing when dealing with immigration, as children of the immigrants will share blood with the home nation and likely the religion. However, they will have lost the language, culture, and tradition of their home nation, and this only becomes more pronounced over successive generations typically. During the transition from the heritage of the home nation to the host, these ethnic groups are a nation unto themselves, neither of the home country or of the host. Over about 3 to 4 generations, the blood, language, religion, culture, and tradition will be more of the host nation due to interbreeding. Uh, this would then consider the immigrants' descendants fully assimilated. However, the identity of the host nation has been permanently altered to accommodate these people who have altered the blood, language, religion, and culture and traditions of the host nation with aspects that they brought over from when they were adopted by the host nation. This only works with relatively small-scale immigration or a situation like the United States had, where there was tons of room for immigrants to move west and create their own communities, while the heritage Americans giving time for this transition to happen. This model does not account for immigrants from radically different nations like the immigration that we see today, but I thought it helped resolve some of the identity crisis that some people are feeling, myself obviously included, in that. Um, and this was kind of so the way E. Michael Jones kind of sees the religion or the nationality type situation is in America, your nationality is more tied up with your religion than your um, bloodline and stuff like that. And there's an aspect of that that's definitely true. And this is kind of, I don't want to say resolved it, but this is kind of a way that um, makes both of those viewpoints work together. Not necessarily that they have to, but um, I believe reflects better the actual situation on the ground, as it were. Uh, but to continue on, I had other questions about what a nation is, what nationalities are, all that kind of stuff. Um, and I went back and looked at some of my old questions, and I had a lot of questions about this stuff. And at the time, I wasn't equipped to answer them, and I think I might be now. We'll kind of dive into them and see what we got. So, are states, especially strong centralized ones, necessary for national identity? And this also goes to another question that I asked myself relatively recently. Were the French French before the Napoleonic era? Did the national identity of France exist before Napoleon, or was France an empire of smaller principalities and nationalities? So if you look at the picture here on that I have, it's of the German nationality, the thing that kind of started to form. But before that, there were a bunch of principalities, and they were perfectly happy to kind of be seen as their separate principalities. And Italy's a big one that's kind of the similar situation where, they identify with more their smaller home regions than the overall larger identity of Italy. So we'll see what. And Italy's been fractured basically continuously since the Roman Empire days up until very recently when it was unified in like 1890, I think. It was pretty late. It was after Germany. German unification was 1870. Uh, and so it's just kind of an interesting aspect, I guess, is the best way to say it. Um, so, the state, while it isn't the identity, we have like these things, the nation state is the thing. I have a feeling it plays a role in creating part of the identity, right? The Pledge of Allegiance and the flag in America uh, helps create a cultural identity. And the big thing that does create culture and identity over time is um, isolation and what was the other factor? Isolation and time, I think. So the more culture spends isolated from other cultures, it develops its own way of thinking, own way of doing things because it can't just look at what other people are doing and adopt and figure out what they're doing and be like, oh, we'll just take that and copy it, or just take that and modify it slightly. They gotta be like, okay, well, let's think of things and do them this way. And this is why Japan has like this crazy history of because they had probably one of the more extreme isolationist situations within world history, where they were isolated for so long and kind of got to develop what it is to be Japanese for so long that they have this very unique culture that you don't find in other areas. Like you have different cultures, but like it's a starker difference between Japan and a lot of other their neighbors that are pretty similar to them, or would in theory be similar to them, and a lot of the stuff they adapted from China. It's still a starker difference than let's say like France and Germany or something like that. And you see these stark differences more with the islands than anywhere else. Like Britain's got this crazy um, freedom bent, and same with America, mainly because it's a colony of Britain. Uh, because it's this island, and so it's a little bit more isolated. It can take some risks on some of these ideological things, and it won't just be crushed by its neighbors when it's in disorder for long periods of time, trying to figure out what wacky new uh, ideological thing they're going to try out next. If you try to do that in Russia, you get crushed. If you try to do that in Poland, you get crushed, and it did happen. And Poland and in Russia, respectively. Uh, so that's where you find um, nations that are in a situation where they can easily be destroyed by their neighbors because they can't stay isolated. Don't usually kind of play the safe game and keep things more centralized, more authoritarian. Stick with what works, because if they try to experiment and it doesn't go well, the chance that they remain a independent nation is pretty low, uh, because their neighbors are just going to come and gobble them up, basically. That's effectively the history of the Poland-Lithuanian Commonwealth. They tried some wacky stuff and it was pretty cool and worked for a little bit, but um, because they were right next to very strong neighbors, it didn't work out in the long run. And so, um, but yeah, so nation states definitely have an aspect to them that helps develop the identity of the culture they're in, but then also the culture uh, helps develop, what the national um, body looks like. So it's kind of a give and take. Were the French before Napoleon? It's kind of hard to say, but he did do a lot of things to kind of unify and homogenize what it is to be France instead of uh, New Orleans and stuff like that. You see the same thing in the Revolutionary War, where uh, people were Virginians or New Yorkers or from Maryland and things like that. They weren't Americans. And after the Civil War, when it was like, there it wasn't 50 states that were working together. It was one united country with one federally run thing with subservient smaller polities in these state local regions. Once it changed to that, you had a homogenization of the culture a little bit more. I mean, obviously, it still took time. You still have Dixie and Yankee identification differences between the North and the South for many years. Still kind of now, but now it's more bifurcated between rural and urban in United States. But those are the kind of things that um, change over time. Another factor that could have created the nation is a ban on cousin marriages by the Catholic Church back in the day. So generally, how tribes stayed together was they would your tribe was fairly small and could stay fairly small as long as you kind of allowed cousin marriages. First cousins is always a problem. Second cousins, I think you have less defective issues, but I think it was first cousin marriages that they banned. Um, but you have defect issues, but they're not super pronounced. And when you live in a pretty small tribe, uh, cousin marriages are gonna be fairly prominent because there's just not enough people within the tribe um, to create new families with. So that's going to be a fairly common practice. Now that changes if you get rid of cousin marriages, then it kind of breaks apart the ability for people to remain at the tribe size of group. Now because they have to intermarry with outside tribes and stuff like that, it forces them to basically make the group larger. And since the nation is effectively the farthest extent that you can trace the family lineage out to, this made it so tribes started to intermarry, and then those intermarrying tribes then created a conglomeration of basically this larger tribe, which we call a nation. And that's generally kind of how it has worked. And there's the unique, like, as you go from like nation size to where like there's national traditions and stuff like that. With the nation in America, we have our 4th of July, and so Veterans Day isn't unique to the United States, but our various remembrances and stuff like that for different aspects of American history and American culture. When you go down and you bring it to maybe your local town has a remembrance for some specific thing, or your state has a remembrance for some specific thing, and then you go down to even smaller, and your family has its own traditions. What you guys do around Christmas, what you guys do around Easter, things like that. And so, there's you have your specific things, but a lot of the stuff that you do for your Easter, your Christmas, and stuff like that is pretty similar to a lot of what your friends are doing, what your cousins are doing, what your extended family kind of people are doing. And then as you grow that up, it's the specifics that are the same are less and less. It becomes more worn down, but there is still a there's still some common threads that you can pull from, that it's like, here's what makes this group have a unique tradition or cultural guide stone that is different from this other group. And so it was I don't know what my point was with that. It's just kind of interesting what how just banning the that kind of marriage thing really formed larger bonds and communities that eventually would coalesce in the nation, the creation of nation states and nations of people, instead of being identified with these much smaller populous groups such as your tribe or your town or things of that nature, where uh, you kind of gotta expand out what is allowed. Maybe that's not the right term, but anyway. So another question that I had posed to myself earlier is, when early empires formed, they must not have all failed by fracturing apart. Otherwise, how would the larger communal groups known as nations be able to be formed? I basically just answered that question. Um, that's a difference between country and city. Okay, I think that's everything that I wanted to talk about with regards to that. Let's go to the next one. Nope. Um, so yeah, so that's kind of what I had on on that front in terms of like what a nation is, what nationalism is, uh, and it's not a clear answer. There's a lot of questions on what is going on, what these different things are, and let me just make sure there isn't anything else that I'm missing. Do oh, I guess one last aspect to the nationalist question is foreigners in a nation's land. This is where it gets kind of weird, because it's you know there's obviously always going to be some amount of foreigners in everybody's land, and also they're not every ethnic group is necessarily going to have their own nation state. Um, there's usually always small pockets within various countries. I know Russia has a bunch of them. America obviously has a ton. Um, China has a bunch, mainly in their where the Uyghurs are at, in their what would it be, western, northwestern corner is mainly where the non-Han Chinese are. Um, so how do I say that? So okay, I'll just read the thing. So if nationalism is the natural, uh, is man's natural state, and a man cannot serve two masters, then it seems almost imperative to the national in a foreign land to subvert it and make it like the motherland, as otherwise you would not be serving the interests of your nation and therefore are a traitor to your own people. So this is where it gets kind of weird. It's like, if you're in somebody else's house, you should be a good guest and follow their rules. Um, but then you have this other issue that kind of comes in of like, you can't serve two masters, and I guess you wouldn't, as long as you're not serving their national interest and just kind of keeping your head down. That seems like maybe a middle ground that you could come to, but um, it's just something that's kind of interesting. This is why we see so much. I think this kind of tug of war is why we see so much um, subversive action by foreign people in another person's land, because this is just, well, part of it is this is how they understand how to run things, right? It's like when you go from one group to another group, and the one group run it right at this one way, this other group runs it a different way. Most people are going to be like, well, I'm familiar with running it this other way, so I want to run it that way. And they never even take the time to figure out whether or not that's a better way of running things, or whether or not it makes sense to do things that way, or is there a reason that they don't run it that way, or you left, more importantly, with a lot of these people that are coming over, is you left that area, that whatever group, because you didn't like how things were run, but yet you're trying to change how things are run in this new group to be like that other group that you supposedly hate. So this is something that happens all the time. But the thing that maintains the society best is for you to willingly submit to the nationals under which you now reside. This is a contradiction, ultimately leads to the only solution being not letting foreigners in the first place. So that's kind of where don't sink the ships, don't let immigrants into the nation in the first place, and you won't have this issue. It's not something that most people are willing, at least right now, they're not willing to do. Victory has defeated you is kind of the going phrase of the day, where we're so comfortable or whatever that we have to go out of our way to not build ourselves up, but stand against a lot of these issues that we see in the modern day, and go above and beyond our comforts and become uncomfortable to fix these issues. And that uncomfort that we initially experienced to fix this issue doesn't mean that we can go back to being lazy. In fact, it's going to lead to more uncomfort and make it so that we have to work even harder. And that's just a proposition that most people are not willing to face. Unfortunately, if we don't do that, it's all going to come crashing down, and it's all going to hit you all at once, and it's going to be a lot harder to change. It's much easier to change a little bit over a long period of time than have to change everything overnight, right? And a lot of people won't even be able to do it. Like, especially if, let's say a war breaks out or something like that, and like the amount of people that are out of shape and the amount of people that are out of shape and don't have the physical physique to be able to conduct a war, even to conduct a military operation, would be so astronomically high that they don't have the time to get into shape to be able to do this kind of stuff. And so they might just end up being swept up in the whole stuff that's happening, and just get basically bowled over and not have a spot. So that's why it's better to change things now than just influence things, instead of going with the flow and hoping that the winds don't blow you away. So I guess that's my little, I don't know if it's a black pill or a white pill. Was it? Be the change you want to be in the world, right? And it doesn't have to be much. Just take little steps every day. Go outside your comfort zone. Do something a little different. If you have some dogs and you don't usually take them on a walk, take them on a walk. It's little things that add up to a lot over time. Try not to make it too complicated. Don't make the goal so big that you'll intentionally fail it, so that you don't actually have to work on something. Just take a little step every day to build the future that you want, and it's amazing what you can do over time, and what happens when you take those steps. But anyway, that's pretty much it for me on this but this topic. So thanks everybody. My last podcast was received very well, so thank you everybody who listened, and hopefully I retained some of you this time around. Also, I will be at Freedom Fest this upcoming week, so if you're there and you happen to listen to the podcast, come by and say hi. I think it'd be fun to meet some new people. I'm just going out there solo, don't really know anybody out there, so it'll be fun to meet some new people if you are going. Anyway, have yourselves all a good day, and find this on YouTube and BitChute and Podbean when it is over. Thank you and goodbye.